Well, good evening, everybody. Happy Wednesday to you. We are in our lesson books still, and we're on lesson number 14, page 68. Recovering from burnout. This is really good. I say that probably about every single lesson that we do. But I was reading through that, man, this is really good. This is good stuff. And it's really relatable. And if anybody in here could ever say that they've never suffered from burnout, one, I think you're lying. But two, that's really impressive. Getting burnout is something that I think a lot of us are familiar with. But we're going to look at this, and it's going to be good. Ron Absher, would you care to lead us in a prayer? Thank you.
Most gracious Father in heaven, we're certainly thankful for today, for all the many blessings that you've given us. We're thankful for our families and all that we have to make this life worth living. Father, we're thankful for the time we have this evening to assemble and study from your word. We pray that you would be with us and help us to understand what you've said to us, help us to learn better how to teach others your will and to obey it ourselves. Father, be with us this evening and help us all to listen for things that we need to learn from your word and help Jason to say and expound those things he's prepared in a way that we can all easily understand. Father, be with those who are unable to be with us, especially we pray for Mickey and his surgery and all the others who are sick and need your blessings, Lord. We pray that you can comfort them and be your will, restore them to their health. Father, go with us and help us always to strive to be better servants of yours. Our prayer in Christ's name.
Amen. Thank you very much. So far in what we've studied, I think out of all the lessons that we've done, one of the things that has stuck out to me the most is how much I relate with Gideon. You remember how he lacked courage and he continually needed that. And I felt really connected with that. I think reading this lesson, I connect a lot with Elijah. Not the Elijah of 1 Kings 18, but more so the Elijah of 1 Kings 19. And that's what this lesson we're going to focus on. We're going to hone in on that story and see what happened. But before we get into that, let's look at the first verse that's located at the top of lesson 14, Isaiah 40, verses 30 and 31. Would someone care to read that for us? Thank you very much. So, at the beginning of this, who is getting tired? Youth. When you look at youth, do you say, oh, that looks like a group of people who get tired a lot? So that's normally not what we think, because you look at our kids running around, we got to tell them not to run out in the parking lot, because they're full of energy, and you see that. But even youths can grow weary and tired. And then who else can stumble? Vigorous young men. It's some young men can be pretty lazy. But vigorous young men, we look at them and we're like, yeah, okay, they've got some energy, they're going to do something, but they can stumble badly too. And so you have these people that should have energy, should be able to continue going and do what they're supposed to do, but then they get tired, they get wore out, and they stumble. But who does it say is filled with new strength? Those that wait for the Lord. Now that's an interesting way to say that, because it's the word he uses there is wait. When we think of waiting, I don't know if that is a word that fills you with energy. It's you need to hurry up and wait. That doesn't seem, it sounds a little counterproductive here. But that's what we do, because who are we waiting for? The Lord, the one who can do something, the one who can actually cause things to happen and give you the strength, that will mount up with wings like eagles, they'll run and not get tired, they'll walk and not be weary. So even though, the youths, they will get tired, and even though the vigorous young men, now they're going to stumble, if you wait on the Lord, then you can be filled with that strength. You can rise up, and you can continue on doing what you're supposed to do because you're trusting in the Lord for strength. That's so encouraging, and that's really cool to think about that. Those are verses that you're probably very familiar with, but every time you think about that, just think about that a little bit more. How does this relate to my current level of burnout? Do I feel like a vigorous youth who is tired? Or do I feel like not a youth at all? Maybe I'm just tired. Maybe I'm just stumbling. But we remember we wait on the Lord, and that will fill us with strength. And so we're going to see some of that as we go along. Any thoughts, comments on that? Warming up section talks about two of our most favorite verses that we go to in the New Testament when it comes to talking about singing. What can singing do for us as Christians? Yeah, builds you up. Gives you hope, gives you encouragement. Singing can change your frame of mind. Singing can put you closer to the Lord. And depending on what you're singing and what you're focused on, that can really be something that leads you to praise God even more and to have that connection with Him. And maybe there are songs that you have in your mind that help give your zeal the biggest boost. Maybe there's something that you feel really worn down, tired. You feel like, man, everything's going wrong. And then you could just, it is well with my soul. There we go. I got it. Or, in Christ alone. Or whatever the song is. And we probably all have go-to songs that we have there. If you don't, pick out something. Get something so you can get in your mind. It helps a lot. It really does. So that can help us in our goal. All right. When it comes to this lesson, though, every zealous Christian eventually will face circumstances that make us, really wondering if we can continue. We have stress, we have strain, we're exhausted, and we got burnout that's, I like how it says, on the horizon. When you think about burnout, how would you describe someone who's burnt out? How can you tell if someone's burnt out? What are some words you would use to describe them? Or yourself?
Exhausted.
Okay, exhausted. What else?
Maybe downhearted or depressed or something maybe too.
Yeah, sad, downhearted, depressed. What else?
Low energy.
Yeah, low energy. A lot of these things are just, you look at it, it's kind of like, the get up and goes, got up and went. There's just nothing left in the tank. And maybe there's some sadness. There's all of this that goes along with that. And we do see so much of this in Elijah. So let's turn over to 1 Kings 19. Because this lesson, we're going to be camping out there. 1 Kings 19. First of all, while you're getting there, if you remember, in 1 Kings 18, where was this located? Where did 1 Kings 18 happen? It's a mountain. Mount Carmel. What happened on Mount Carmel? There you go. That was succinctly put. Prophets of Baal were defeated by the true God. Because you had those prophets who were, and there were 450 of them. There were a bunch. And they were all doing all they could to get Baal to bring fire down on that altar. And they cried out, they were cutting themselves, they were screaming, and Elijah just kept hey, maybe he's on vacation, maybe, you need to scream louder. And nothing happened. They did that all day. Then Elijah comes up, and what did he do to his sacrifice before he asked God to rain fire on him? Yeah, it was okay, fill it up now, pour water all over it until it's just overflowing with water. Now, we've talked a lot about fire in this class. We've talked about a lot about how to build a fire. Is that the proper way to build a fire? Start with dousing it with water? No, that's not going to build a good fire. Not setting himself up for success here, but he is setting God up for showing who he is. Because as soon as he asked, it said it was the time of the evening sacrifice. He called out to the Lord. And what did God do? Yeah, immediately. It just like soaked it all. Well, it didn't soak it up, it burned it up. And he just like demolished that. It proved who he was. Now imagine you're Elijah at this point. And you've overcome, right? You've had this face-to-face combat with Satan. You've had these prophets of Baal shown to be false prophets. Then they die because, that was part of the deal. And at this point, how are you feeling? Pretty good. Like, all right. Now, finally, we've done something to get rid of these prophets of Baal. So obviously, the next steps are everyone is going to recognize how great God is. And the entire nation is going to turn back to him. And everybody's going to be on God's side now. Is that what happened? That's why we have chapter 19. No, it is not. That did not happen at all. And so, you have some things that happen. Would someone care to read 1 Kings 19, verses 1 and 2?
Now Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done, and how he had killed the prophets with the sword. Then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah, saying, So may the gods do to me, and even more, if I do not make your life as the life of one of them by tomorrow about this time.
Awesome. Thank you very much. So, Ahab goes, but he's the king, and he goes back to his wife Jezebel. There's a lot could be said about that, but she says, okay, after all this happened, Elijah, you're next. Like, you are going to be just like one of these prophets of Baal. Now, if you're Elijah and you're thinking about what just happened, like, God has just proved himself in this great victory. But now you got someone who is opposing you and saying, now I'm coming after you. What do you do in that case? And it's really easy to sit here in a nice, like, air-conditioned building and with the comforts and talk about, well, in that case, you know what I would have done? Because God just took me through this. I would also just, be like, no, you won't. Like, who knows what we would do. But we see what Elijah did. And in verse 3, what was the first words in verse 3? He was afraid. And immediately he turns and he runs. He's getting out of Dodge. He is just going, came to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah, left a servant there. Verse 4, he went a day's journey into the wilderness, and he came under a juniper tree. And what was his prayer at the end of the verse 4? Yeah, he did. He was like, I tried, I'm here, now they're wanting to kill me. Like, you might as well just take me now, because, I've got nothing left in me. And when you read this, at first you might be like, what happened? Like, how could you be so on fire back in chapter 18 and then just completely put out and asking to die in the first 4 verses of the next chapter? Like, how do you do that? How do you drop that low? And you think about the situation and what happened. You wonder how exhausting it probably was for Elijah during all of that, when going up against all the prophets, and you have all of that on his mind, and he was doing that. And then you finally get the victory, what you think is the victory, but you realize your work's not over yet. Like, there's still opposition, and there's still things to do. Like, I can see him just being like, again? Like, we're still going through all this? Like, and so you kind of see where he's coming from a little bit here. Not saying it was a good thing, but you can see what happened and why he was where he was. So instead of, like it says at the page on top of page 69, he could have been rejoicing in the streets of Samaria. Could have. That would have been an appropriate response. But instead, he runs and hides in the wilderness because he's afraid. And he's completely burned out. It's like, I don't have the energy to get up and move. I can't keep going. And then there's this whole thing. In verse 3, we saw he was afraid. Verse 4, he doubted his ability to continue. He was like, I can't do it anymore. I'm ready to die. And verses 5 through 8, it just explains how tired, wore out, fatigued he was. And God kept feeding him and encouraging him. And this is the passage that people go to. It's like, it's okay to like get a snack and take a nap. And this is what he told Elijah to do. Well, he took it. And so God brought him food and took care of him. And even in verse 10, verse 10 is kind of the same as verse 14. But someone read verse 10. This is really interesting what he says.
I have been very zealous for the Lord God of hosts, for the children of Israel have forsaken your covenant, torn down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they seek to take my life.
Okay, thank you very much. So what does he say? What was the word he used about himself? What had he been? Zealous. Well, interesting connection there. We have that in our book title. Yeah, and he was, and we saw that in chapter 18, and we've analyzed that before. He was very zealous. He was obviously. But right here, would you describe his actions as the actions of someone who is acting zealously? Does not seem to be so. No, we see a lack of courage. We see lack of energy, and we'll get to some of that in a second. But he is obviously burnt out, and there's something different right now. Realizing how far Elijah had fallen in that short span of time, maybe we can relate to that. Maybe that's somewhere that you've been. Maybe you've experienced some kind of very emotionally spiritual high or something, and you felt just very spiritual, very motivated to do things. But then things don't turn out like you think they should. And either an evangelistic effort, people aren't listening, or there's just a lot of opposition, and you got a lot of closed doors in your face, and you got a lot of people who are seem interested, but then they're not really. Or maybe you're trying really hard to do one thing to encourage someone, it's not working, and they're just seems like you're spinning your wheels, not getting anywhere. It's amazing how quickly our perspective changes. And how we could feel so invested and motivated to do something one day, and then the next we're totally like, what's the point? Why do I keep doing this? I should probably give up. And we see that in Elijah. And do you know, that takes a while to get out of that slump. When we find ourselves burnt out, it takes a good bit of time to, I was about to say get burnt in, but start our zeal fire back, to get back where we need to be. And we're going to see it. Elijah was there. It's 40 days. It was over a month, a month and a half-ish, that took him to get him back on track. But something to consider with this. If you have ever faced burnout, and you've felt that, spiritual burnout, however you want to describe that, what that means is that you, at least at one point, have been pushing forward to a goal, and you've been really trying to get at it, and you've faced some opposition. That's actually a good sign, because there's plenty of people who would just give up completely before they even experience any kind of opposition, or as soon as they experience any kind of thing. They would just totally abandon it. So if we're feeling burnout, and we understand that I am not where I need to be, and we're self-aware enough to realize that, that's actually a good sign, because that means we can do something about it. That means we haven't quit yet. We haven't given up. Because, if you give up, well, you've given up. You're not going to keep trying. But that's the key here. A lot of people quit before it even gets that tough. So just take that where it is. But think through that and just realize when we face opposition, that is an opportunity to grow and to get past that. Okay, and the last part of this little introduction section, Elijah was facing difficult circumstances, but instead of giving up, turned to God for relief. And that is really, really important. A lot of times when we feel overloaded, the reason that we feel overloaded is because we think that we should be able to handle everything on our own. We think that I have the tools I need to get through this. I'm just being lazy. I'm not doing this right because I know I've done this before and I've been through this. Why can't I just do it? I just need to get up and do it because I am equipped. I am strong enough. I have the power. But Elijah wasn't that way. He turned to God, which is interesting. That's what we need to do too. Like, we need to realize if we're trying to rely on our own strength to get us through, we are going to end up burnt out. We're going to end up very disappointed. So it's always turning to remember Isaiah 40, those that wait for the Lord. Like, that's the key. We have to wait for the Lord. We have to go back to Him. We have to accept the help and resources He provides. Don't lean on our own understanding, but turn to the Lord, because He's the one that has that. All right, any other thoughts or comments or anything before we get to his main hurdles? Okay.
So, when it says wait on the Lord, and I'm thinking if we don't stop and pray before we start acting in a zealous manner, we could be going the wrong way very zealously and exhaust ourselves doing the wrong things that are not beneficial. And so we need to stop, pray, wait, and then act.
That's a really good point.
Zealously going the wrong way.
Yeah. If you zealously go in the wrong way, that's a good way to get burnt out. That is very true. Because you will use all your time and energy on something that is ultimately going to be unfulfilling somehow, some way, for some reason. So yes, absolutely. We have to stop. We have to pray. We have to make sure. And this goes back to some of the fuel. If you really focus on the fuel sources that we were looking at, acting in wisdom, like understanding that what we are doing is what God wants us to do. Not just, I have some kind of harebrained scheme that I want to just go ahead and jump in and do. Like, we need to make sure that that's what the Lord would have us do. And that's hard to get sometimes, but we do need to pray about it and seek wise counsel and all those things as well. Any other thoughts through that point? Let's look and try to find where the breakdown is. And this is a really good case study to do, because this helps you to work through your own burnout as well. Remember, the ways to start a fire: you need heat, some kind of spark, you need fuel to keep it going, and you need the right environment, oxygen and such. Not any, don't add water to it. We need all those things to get that fire going. So if we're burnt out and our fires went out, that means there's some problem somewhere with one of those fuels, with one of those things. Either our heat, our environment, or our fuel, or maybe all three. And that's kind of typical, all three. So let's look at this. Burnout is more than just feeling stressed out. Like, we all feel stressed out in different ways, but there's a difference between being stressed out and being burnout. And I think you know that, and you can relate to that. But let's look at this. Elijah's heat problem. This paragraph stood out to me probably more so than any other in this lesson for some reason. Maybe it's just connected to me personally for whatever reason. But Elijah, as a prophet, Elijah witnessed God's direct action in many miraculous events. Like, think about the things that God did through Elijah. The prophets of Baal, like that whole sacrifice thing. That was awesome. And he witnessed God working through that. But the thing is, Elijah failed to see God working in sort of what we would call behind the scenes, the subtle things. And sometimes I think we do look at, the great things that God has done as, whoa, that's obviously God. We can see God working because he did this, and it was so big, and it's so powerful, and he's so mighty. But what we fail to realize is that same God, who has that same level of control, can also work behind the scenes in things that we don't see and things that we don't understand and might not ever know. But we realize God is still working. And that's something that I struggle with sometimes. He was overlooking God's ability to work behind the scenes in more subtle ways. He didn't see that, and he didn't connect with what God was doing when he didn't have that great, all the show of the miracle. So we need to be careful with that. We need to realize God can work in the storm as much as he can work, with a nice gentle breeze blowing through. And that's, by the way, that was a direct allusion to what is said in verses 11 through 13. Because what happens there is God is displaying himself. And he's he says, God passed before him. And so, verse 11, go forth, stand on the mountain before the Lord. Behold, the Lord was passing by. And a great and strong wind was rending the mountains and breaking in pieces the rock before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake, a fire. But the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a sound of a gentle blowing. And that's where he found the Lord. Which is like an interesting way to put that. And it's very poetic. And you see that. And a lot of times we think, yeah, God acts in huge, big ways that are obvious and we can see. And sometimes he does that. But sometimes he works in ways that we don't expect. And so we really have to pay attention and listen. And that's why we need to wait for the Lord. Realize he's working on an answer. As soon as you pray, he's working on an answer. Now, what his answer is, that's up to him. And what time frame he delivers, that's also up to him as well. But we realize God is still working, and God is still there. So don't shortchange God just because you think, well, he's not showing me anything. Well, you might not see anything. Or maybe you're just not looking in the right place. So that was his heat problem. So he lost that source of ignition because he did not feel close to God anymore. Remember that? Like, we have to get close to God for his heat to ignite us. The fuel problem, there's a lot of breakdowns there. And you can consider all the fuel sources that we looked at. Jezebel's vow to kill him, and the courage that we saw in chapter 18, that was gone here. He was afraid. And so he didn't have that courage anymore. So courage was gone. 40 days of walking drained his energy. Yeah, he had no energy left. That's true. His prayer to God to take his life reveals a lack of diligence. He wasn't wanting to keep going. Like he was, I'm done. I'm like, this is too much. And then traveling to Mount Horeb left him in the wrong place for his next act of service. Like, so the things that he was supposed to be involved in his service to the Lord, he couldn't do where he was, actually. And so, like, at the end of this, we're going to see that God tells him, you need to turn around and go back because I got some work for you to do there. So not only did he run out in the wilderness, he ran away from where he actually needed to be. So that's something to consider too. A lot of times when we feel burnt out, we aren't running toward the right type of service. We're not thinking through these things clearly. We're not courageous. We're zapped of energy, and we've given up on diligence, and all these things. And so it's no surprise his fire was burning out. We can do the same thing if we are missing out on those fuel sources. So there was a fuel problem. But not only that, there was an environment problem too. What was the last thing Elijah said in his prayer? Well, not the last, the next to last thing. Like in verse 10. Before he says, they seek my life to take it away, what does he say? I alone am left. How many times does Satan work through that? Like, one of Satan's greatest tools is to make us feel alone. Like, we are the only ones suffering in this way. We're the only ones that are trying to do the right thing, so what's the point? Why would you even continue to try to do it? Because nobody else cares, and nobody else is going to be doing it. So, like, you're on your own. Or, maybe I think I'm the worst person ever. Like, no one else has struggled with these sins like I have. And so I'm just terrible. I should just give up. Whatever the case, Satan is really, really good at making us feel alone. So what we need is, that's why there's so much said, especially in the New Testament, about unity, about like coming together, about doing things with each other, for each other, and being part of a group who cares about the Lord and cares about each other and is like motivating each other. Elijah's environment wasn't where it needed to be. He wasn't surrounded by people that would help build him up. Like, he did feel alone. Now, I'll go ahead and ask this to get this out of the way. Was he actually alone? Was there anybody else in Israel that was faithful to the Lord? Can you give me a rough estimate? About 7,000. Yeah, that's in verse 18. It's like, there's still 7,000. Like, you're not alone. But sometimes we feel that way. And sometimes this is tricky. Like, Satan is really, really good at this. We can feel alone even in a group of people. Sometimes we feel isolated even though we're around others. And part of that, maybe it's we're feeling like others aren't reaching out to us. Maybe we're not reaching out to others as much as we should too. And so this whole environment thing, it's not just, the solution to the environment problem isn't just like, I'm going to plant myself in the middle of a group of people and that's going to fix it. Well, no, not necessarily. Because you can be in the middle of a bunch of people who are doing the right thing, but you can still be doing the wrong thing. Like, you need to change your perspective. You need to connect. And ultimately, obviously, connect with the Lord. And that's the ultimate goal. But these relationships, that connection, that can really help. So we see Elijah so many times saying, I'm alone. I'm facing this alone. There's nobody here with me. And that's discouraging. If you think you're going through something alone, it makes it hard to get through. But, he was reminded, thankfully, by the Lord, you're not alone. And so don't worry about that. And even that thing that happened in chapter 18, all of those Baal worshipers, what would it have been like to be Elijah? To be the only person standing up in front of hundreds, like literal hundreds of people who were worshiping this false god. Like, even though, I know, he knew that he was right. He knew that he was on God's side and he was doing what the Lord wanted. But how would that feel to see that? And just be like, look how many people the opposition has. And look at how secure they feel in what they're doing. And it's like safety in numbers type thing. And so it messes with you. Sometimes, do you ever get discouraged when you look at people who are living in sin? And you're like, why are they like doing so well? Like, and it's just like everybody seems so happy, and everybody's getting along, or whatever it is. You're looking at something, and it's like, why can't I have that? Why can't we do that? What's stopping us from that? And it can be very discouraging if that's how you're looking at it. So you can see how Elijah felt in that situation, and you understand why he felt so hard, so quick, almost immediately. Any thoughts on those, his obstacles, the problems that got in his way? It was super important to talk about all that because we need to understand how to identify the breakdown in our relationship with God and understand where our burnout is coming from. But I think it is even more important to look at the solution. How do we fix it? Because I think we've all been there. We can relate to that. We've had burnout, and if not, you're going to. But how do you get through that? And we have to keep that in mind. So, thankfully, this is also a story that shows us how the Lord is working in Elijah's life to help him through this so he can get back to doing the things that he needed to do. And spoiler alert, he did come back around, and he did some great things for the Lord after that. So, God worked through him very much so. So let's look at this. Beating burnout God's way. First thing there. Heat. Spending time alone with God. This is what Meredith brought up earlier. Right? We need to take time to step back, and we need to pray. And we need to spend time alone with God. Now, there's several other things mentioned here. Taking time to read, to meditate. Sometimes I think we're just like, okay, I did my Bible reading, I said a prayer, so I'm good. Like, meditate. Are we thinking? Are we actually studying instead of reading? Are we like trying to see what God is wanting us to see in the scriptures? Are we taking time to pray? And we'll get into more of that in a minute. But are we really connecting with the Lord there? And another thing that he mentions there is fasting. I'm going to be honest with you. I haven't done that nearly as much as I should. I probably can only remember maybe 2 times when I've done that for spiritual reasons. And it's helpful. Like, I think we should be doing that more. Because it's sort of a reset. It helps you refocus. Because if you realize, the hunger pains that you feel, we need to hunger for God in the same way. And so anything you can do to help get your mind back, especially if you're in this crisis mode of burnout, like we need to do something drastic. We need to do things to get connected with the Lord again, to get connected with our fuel, to our heat source, so we can pick that back up. And a lot of times we just neglect those things, especially if we're super burnout. It's like, well, I don't have time for all that. my life is too busy. And, being busy is one of the easiest ways to get burnt out. When I say busy, I mean with like all of the things that are going on constantly. So that will do that for sure. Another heat thing to get the heat back, connecting with God, and this relates back to this, is speak honestly about your feelings. Would you describe Elijah's prayers to God in this chapter that we've seen to be pretty open? Do you think he was really sharing how he really felt? Like, he came to God and said, I want to die. Like, that's pretty open. It doesn't sound like he was holding back. Sometimes I think that we think that when we're praying to God, it's like, well, I need to make my speech more holy. And I need to, give this appearance to God. Like I'm like, Lord, I come to you and I request your help. Sometimes we need to throw ourselves down on the floor and cry for mercy. Like, do you think God already knows how we feel? Absolutely does. So do you think we're doing any service to ourselves or to the Lord by trying to hide things or cover things up? Like, no. You come to God in prayer, tell him what you feel. Tell him what's on your mind. He is literally the only one who can really handle that, right? Out of anybody, you can say anything. It's God. And so he wants to hear you. And he wants you to be open. And so I like how the book says this there. It's when you pray to God, you must be respectful. And part of being respectful is not covering things up, not sugarcoating. Like, come to God. Lay it all out. You need to connect. And you need to get close to him. And anytime we feel like, man, there's just something in my life and I don't feel close to God, and we keep ignoring it, we're leaving that space. We need to go all the way to the Lord. Aaron.
I think David is a great example of that openness in prayer.
Amen.
He just pours his heart out. You can almost hear the anguish in his voice.
You can. Yeah, the Psalms, my goodness. Like you see David and others too, but David, he really opens himself up. He pours his heart out. And a lot of times we read those Psalms and you probably get a little bit uncomfortable. Like it's saying, how long, God, are you going to let me suffer? Like, why am I like this? Like I'm drowning in my tears on my bed. Like that is an actual line. Like all of those things. And we're like, that's not how I pray. Well, maybe it should be. Like, maybe we need to get more connection to the Lord. We need to be open. So use the Psalms as a guide. I think that is very helpful to read through and see that. Because it helps us to connect as well. If we really, truly want to get close to God, we need to open ourselves up. And we need to connect with him on a deep level. Here, we saw that with Elijah. He was like, God, I'm ready to die. I'm used up. But God was there for him, and he was able to get close to God, and we were able to see some work in other areas as well. Anything else on heat? How he was able to get closer to God, how we can? Let's look at fuel. Fuel is really important. So, see God working in his ways. And we talked about this a second ago, that in verses 11 through 13, we saw God showing like this great wind, but God wasn't there. And then an earthquake, but God wasn't there. But then a fire, and then God wasn't there. But then there was like this slight breeze, and there God was. We need to look for where God is. See God working in his ways. Sometimes we need to really look at situations. Read the Bible. That's something that you can do, because you can obviously see God working in the ways that he told us that he did. It's like, hey, I did this. That's helpful. And you see God, again, working in big ways, and you see him working behind the scenes, in working his will, making sure that's accomplished. There's a lot to be said about that. You look at what happens next, and, God mentioned in, verses 15, to 17, 18, that he's got some work for Elijah to do. He's like, no, listen, you think that this is pointless, and you think that the nation is just given over to sin and idolatry. But no, it's not. Because I want you to go and appoint this one guy, Hazael, king of Aram. And I want you to go and appoint Jehu as king of Israel. And I want you to get Elisha, and he's going to be prophet in your place. And you got these people, and he even reaffirms him. It shall come, in verse 17, it shall come about that the one who escapes from the sword of Hazael, Jehu will put to death. And the one who escapes the sword of Jehu, Elisha shall put to death. So it's like, all this that you're worried about right now, I got it taken care of. Listen, I've already got that in the plans. Like, this is going to happen. We don't get to see that a lot of times. We don't have God telling us, no, here's how I work this out for you. This is what's going to happen. But we realize this is how he helped Elijah through this. We realize God is bigger than us. And what's happening is bigger than us, too. Like, it's not all about you. It's not all about me. So why are we feeling burnout when God's the one doing the work? Like, we need to let God do the work that he needs to, and then realize I'm just getting in the way if I'm trying to slow him down. Now, the next thing is set out for the next act of service. So God said, go and do that. I want you to get up and get out of this wilderness, go back to over here, and I want you to appoint these guys and get these people in, and this is how we're going to fix this. And so, that's what he does. He gets up and he gets moving. And once he gets moving again, things start to happen. Things start to shift. And, when you stop thinking about yourself and you're able to jump in to the service aspect and you're able to help others and do what the Lord wants, there's still work for you to do. God's showing him, you are not useless. You're not done. Like, you're not ready to die. No, I've still got some more stuff for you to do. So you need to do it. That's what we need sometimes. Like, give yourself that pep talk. It's like, no, God still has me here for a reason, and so I want to find out what he wants me to do, and I want to do it. But then this helps lead to the last thing, the environment. Oh, I like how he put, settle down. You are not alone. Sometimes we need to calm down and realize, we're not alone. It's not just us against the world. God's with us. And he has faithful people as well. Like, make connections with spiritual people. Reach out. Find ways to connect with your family in Christ. And realize that even when you have to take a stand against worldliness, take a stand against sin, you're not alone because other people are doing it too. And even if nobody around you is doing it, read the Bible. There's examples of people who have done that throughout history. Like, you're joining a pretty good crowd if you're doing that and standing up. And if we're persecuted for doing things the right way, Jesus was too, so we should count it a blessing, like Peter said, that we can endure such persecution just the same way that Jesus did. I know that's not like what we want to hear when we're suffering from burnout and all that, but that's just a dose of reality, and hopefully that helps think this through a little bit. We're not alone, and there are some things that we can look forward to. After this, Elijah, he did a lot of other stuff too. God worked through him to, in chapter 21, Elijah confronted Ahab about the sin with Naboth's vineyard and all that. If you don't remember that, read that. It was interesting. And Ahab, he repented. Ahab, the terrible, wicked king, repented because of what Elijah said to him. That was definitely God's work. Especially we see that in 2 Kings 2 when Elisha comes and he has that relationship with Elisha and he's able to teach him and sort of like pass on the mantle, well, literally. But then also, like, Elisha took up the prophetness. And do you remember what happened to Elijah was the last thing that we read about Elijah doing? Yeah. So he got taken up to heaven in a pretty awesome way. And so God let him go out with style. And so all of that, he was able to bounce back from burnout because he waited for the Lord. Because he communicated with God. He didn't hide his feelings. He was reaching out to him. He was praying to him. And throughout this month and a half time period, got back on track because he let the Lord help him. If we are burnt out, let the Lord help you. Like, just connect with him. Pray to him, and throughout all this, there are ways that we can get close to God again. Any other thoughts, comments, questions?
I have to think about the preachers and churches that are dying. And I'm trying to get the Zeal fire going and trying to get nothing. And not over and over and over. How burnout they could be. And I know some of our preachers that we support are in those places, and so I think our letters can help
I really like that. This is why we need to keep writing those letters, keep encouraging these people who are in those difficult situations. We have a lot of connection here. A lot of people don't. So that's really good. Well, thank you all very much. We will pick up, Lord willing, on Sunday in lesson 15. Thank you all.